Friends, hello. My name is Ihor Havryshchak. I am very pleased to introduce our regular guest, political technologist, Abbas Gallyamov. Abbas, hello. Hello, Igor. By the way, Abbas, I would like to start our conversation today with a video that is very popular right now. It is not recent, but it is very revealing. It's the 99th year, and Putin reminisces, talks about Crimea. But he's not saying the same thing he's saying now. Let's hear it. We don't like that Ukraine wants to join NATO, we want to take Crimea, or we just can't agree on money, gas, sugar. What is our main problem with Ukraine? First of all, we don't want to take Crimea. This is absolute stupidity, thank you. If we start taking anything from anyone, something will be taken away from us, or we will lose something. In any case, we will start such a redistribution in the territories of the former Soviet Union, from which we will never be able to recover. We have only 400 disputed territories on the territory of the Russian Federation. 400. I want everyone to know about this. This is first of all. Secondly, sugar, gas. This is still the second, third, so it is a field on which we can argue, but argue no more than that. The main problem, in my opinion, is Russia's heavy imperial legacy. For some reason, everyone thinks that Russia has remained an empire. Now, those who are applauding, let them listen to me carefully. Everyone thinks that Russia has remained an empire and still treats it as an empire. And this has not been the case for a long time. When politicians say something wrong, or remember Biden, right? All the time they come out and explain what he said. Very often they say the phrase, "You misunderstood." But here in this case, it's the year 1999, the president, then still pre. Here you cannot say you misunderstood. It's 180 degrees, the opposite of what Putin is doing and saying now. How can things change so much? I have a question. Has he always had in his mind the annexation of Crimea? Yes. The seizure of territories, or did it come to him somehow? No, of course not. Not at all. Did you notice that when he said this phrase now, he did not just say, let's say we won't take this Crimea and so on. He said it extremely confidently, even arrogantly towards the bearers of the opposing point of view, adding his trademark, "You're crazy," right? Or as he said, well, something like that. Yes, some kind of characterization. And so now he is saying exactly the opposite. Just as sure, also with the blink of an eye, as they call it. Look, I've been trying to argue since the first day of the war, trying to prove to everyone, especially in the West, this point of view is widespread. To say that Putin dreams of restoring the Soviet Union, and almost from the first day of the war, he dreamed of restoring the Soviet Union. So he brought back the coat of arms and the anthem. Yes, the coat of arms. But he brought back the anthem. He brought back the red flag. You know that as soon as he took office as president, he immediately returned the red flag of the Russian army. That is the official flag of the armed forces. And so I'm still trying to prove that no, guys, no, you paint him as some kind of romantic. You know, like a romantic who has some ideals, right? Some strategic goal towards which he is moving. No, well, the romantic was Lenin, who really believed in socialism, and was ready to put all the people there in order to build this socialism. Yeah, and he was willing to take risks. Truly a fanatic, fanatically believed. I recently read Russell's memoirs. He's a very famous philosopher, a wise man. And he came to Moscow in 1922 and talked to Lenin. And I remembered that he wrote that I was disappointed, he said, that Lenin really thought Marxism was ideal. He believes that quoting Marx is enough to prove his point, while Putin is opportunistic, saying what benefits him at the moment. Despite the myth of Russian imperialism, their current behavior reflects that mentality. But if you don't just look at the external form, but dig into the essence, understand the dynamics, the logic, look at the polls, you'll see that it's artificial, it's brought in. At that moment, the people did not gather, neither Crimea was needed, so no, and their Chechnya was not needed, And so all the two Chechen wars, the Levada Center conducted the relevant surveys in 3 waves, in the early 2000s, in the middle of the 2000s, and closer to 2010. This means that all 3 times Russians themselves called both Chechen wars unjust on their part. That is, we Russians fought an unjust war. At that point, I was recently publishing polls, the first polls in the COM when it first emerged in the late 80s and early 90s. The minority spoke out when the parade of sovereignty began. As we were approaching the 90s, yes, a minority of Russians were in favor of keeping the peoples, so to speak, within Russia against the wishes of the majority, which was in favor of letting them go if they wanted to. At that moment, this point of view, which Putin expressed, was popular. What happened next? Next, Putin had a conflict with the West. The essence of it is that the West began to criticize Putin for curtailing freedom of speech, destroying elections, and violating governance.
Сверхцентрализацию страны, уничтожение федерализма, уничтожение местного самоуправления. То есть все те демократические институты, которые в 90-е годы начали было создаваться, Путин их начал.
Putin began dismantling the democratic institutions established in the 1990s to build an authoritarian regime, which drew Western criticism. Despite this, he was willing to befriend the West and even considered joining NATO, as he recently confirmed.
Он ведь готов был дружить с Западом, он даже готов был вступить в НАТО. Вот вы сейчас привели цитату по поводу Крыма, вы точно так же можете привести его воспоминания, его цитаты. Да, он и недавно это подтверждал, что да, мы хотели вступить в НАТО, был момент.
At one point, Russia expressed a desire to join NATO, which was not accepted, leading to the view that it was NATO's fault. At that time, NATO didn't see Russia as a major threat. Putin assisted the U.S. during the Afghanistan operation after 9/11 by providing logistical support and access to Russian bases in Central Asia. The very territory of Russia, the overflight of American transport planes on Russian territory, was allowed, which supplied therefore the troops in Afghanistan, and so on, and so on. So he was the first person who expressed condolences to the Americans out of all the leaders of states. I was working in his speechwriting group at the time, and I remember very well that he was the first person who sent a very warm, very heartfelt condolence letter to America. In general, he thinks, guys, I respect your interests, but instead you come to me and tell me how to live. Go to hell. So he started a conflict with the West. But this conflict had to be explained to the Russians somehow. You can't say, they want me not to rig the elections, so I'm in conflict with them. You can't explain it like that. The essence of the conflict is often misrepresented. Instead of acknowledging it, alternative explanations emerged, framing NATO as a threat that organizes color revolutions in the CIS space, portraying NATO's expansion as a danger to Russia. Then added to that, because it's also not very channels after 2018, it stopped working. Russians stopped being interested in it. A new bogeyman appeared that already at the level of value confrontation began. Like Russians are all in favor of family values, traditions. These are all surrogates invented to disguise the real essence of the conflict.
Призванные всего лишь замаскировать сущности, реальную суть конфликта.
The conflict exclusively is Russia's current conflict with the West. It has neither value explanations nor geopolitical explanations. Here, feuding with Russian liberals who are trying to limit his power, or even worse, overthrow him. What scoundrels, yes. So they want the president to change every 25 years. Those bastards. So Russian liberals are Putin's enemies. They rely on the help of the West. Yeah, well, that means the West is the enemy. That's the true nature of the conflict. As the conflict grew, expanding influence in the CIS became a tactic to establish friendly regimes along Russia's borders, creating a ring of allies instead of enemies. This was aimed at ensuring support in the struggle against the West, particularly in areas with significant Russian-speaking populations from the former Soviet Union. Well, okay, let's influence them, let's interact with them. Now, this imperialism has arisen. It has arisen as a tool, yes, but over time, the distant goal, so to speak, goes beyond the horizon. And the current practice, well, it gradually takes on the appearance of a goal. This looks like a struggle for the restoration of the USSR, although I repeat, Putin never dreamed of this. Well, look at his interview, this one right here. Just now we were talking about the early 90s. Oh, the early 2000s, late 90s. Throughout the 90s, well, if Putin really needed this USSR as much as we imagine now, he would have been doing it in the 90s. But he would have gone and joined the CPRF, for example, which was engaged in trying to recreate the USSR. There were many other parties, but none of these parties were satisfactory. There was democracy in the country then, so Putin had to make his own party and persuade people about it. This is how politics works all over the world. Any truly ideologized person behaves this way. He served faithfully and devotedly to whom? Sobchak, one of the three, within the framework of the mythology that circulated among Russian patriots, in the 90s. The three main villains who destroyed the USSR inside Russia. Yes, that means Eltsine, that means Sobchak, and that means Gavril Popov. The three Democrats, as they were called at the time. So they said with hatred, right here, directly, damn Democrats. And Putin served this Democrat, who, so to speak, was destroying the USSR in the most loyal way, right up to the last. And he had nothing to burn, nothing to sting, so to speak. And he felt great. That is why, in the case of Putin, you should not take what he says at face value. You see, strictly speaking, why should I tell you Ukrainians this? You know it yourself. You see how many times it's really like that old joke. How can you tell when he's lying? Yeah, when his lips are moving, who every year has been nurturing himself. And I want this, and now I want this. Now I want to renew the Soviet Union. The collapse of the Soviet Union was the biggest disaster of the 20th century.
Да, Аббас, но вот если говорить об аппетитах, хотелках Путина, вот я с вами соглашусь, что да, в 90-е он даже не думал о восстановлении Советского Союза. Но мне кажется, Запад сам взращивал аппетиты Путина. Потому что если мы вспомним 2014 год, аннексию Крыма, это было очень осторожно. Он боялся, очевидно же, да, проливать кровь. Зашли зеленые человечки. Потом реакция очень вялая лидеров мира на это все. На Крым, аннексию Крыма, на войну на Донбассе. И вот эти взращивания аппетитов со стороны Запада своей нерешительностью вот дали того Путина, который есть, который с каждым годом взращивал себя. А я хочу это, а я теперь хочу это, а вот сейчас я хочу возобновить Советский Союз. А вот развал Советского Союза была самая большая катастрофа 20 века.
Igor, of course, there is a certain logic in what you are saying, and you can make claims against the West, especially when the West makes claims against Russians that you voted for Putin. But Russians have the right, of course, to say, why shouldn't we have voted for him? You shook hands with him at all the international summits, you cooperated with him, he is normal. Okay, guy, are you sending us a signal? You started to marginalize him, you criticized him. It seems, yes. But at the same time, there was nothing but words. That is, at the level of actions, you did not send us any signals that Putin is bad and is doing something wrong. Yes, that's why, in principle, we can make complaints about the West in response. But at the same time, I understand the West as well.
Поэтому, в принципе, можно в ответ предъявлять претензии к Западу. Но при этом я, в общем-то, как бы Запад тоже понимаю.
What was he there in 2014 to get into the bottle if the Ukrainians themselves gave up Crimea? You see, there was no reaction from Kiev. Well, at the level of words, there were no attempts at resistance, but it always helps the one who resists. Now, if the Ukrainian armed forces had not given this mortal battle, so to speak, to Putin's hordes that invaded Ukraine, then the West would not have gone to war. It was the same thing that happened with Crimea. People, in principle, are opposed to average behavior. If we can take it easy, why should we take it easy? It's human nature. People are also opposed to unnecessary risks. A situation has to become critical in order to react violently. War, massive shelling, killing, it's a critical situation, and you have to step out of your comfort zone and react. There was no war then. There was a showdown in the post-Soviet space. Two former fragments of the USSR are dividing some territory. Why should the West interfere?
Для того, чтобы жестко отреагировать. Война, массированные обстрелы, убийства – это критическая ситуация, да, и тут приходится выходить из зоны комфорта и реагировать. А тогда война не случилась. Случилась какая-то там разборка на постсоветском пространстве, да, два бывших осколка бывшего Советского Союза делят какую-то территорию. Нам что с того? Да, возобладала такая точка зрения. То есть формально обозначились, какие-то санкции ввели. По тем временам они казались очень даже такими неплохими.
This is how politics works globally. Ideologized individuals act this way. Throughout the 90s, Putin fought for the restoration of the USSR. At that time, the Iranian regime viewed Russia as a medieval state. While Russia's actions were unusual and piggish, it's important to remember that just a few years earlier, Russia was resetting relations with Obama and did not block the UN resolution that led to Gaddafi's overthrow.
Россия в Совете Безопасности ООН проголосовала за, не стала блокировать резолюцию против...
Here, it didn't seem like Russia was lost forever, so to speak. Yeah, she behaves differently in different situations. Here it's normal, here it's something different. Let's not burn bridges. Let's try to normalize relations somehow. It's a natural reaction of normal people to an abnormal situation.
Нормализовать отношения. То есть это естественная реакция нормальных людей на ненормальную ситуацию.
The natural reaction is, let's try to negotiate, to settle. Now, the sanctions against Russia are questionable in their effectiveness, but they are the most massive sanctions that mankind has ever known.
Когда стало понятно, что психи, тогда уже стали гораздо более серьезно ко всему этому относиться. И сейчас санкции против России введенные, можно спорить об их эффективности, но они самые массированные из того, что знало человечество, насколько я понимаю. Я сам не специалист в области санкций, но я слышал неоднократно.
I have heard this point of view many times from experts. But I repeat, of course, there is some truth in what you say. So we could mobilize, we could be more active. In fact, the West has always behaved like this, you know? The same America was very reluctant to enter the First World War.
Даже Америка очень не хотела вступать ни в Первую мировую войну и вступила в нее гораздо позже, чем другие страны, в ней участвовавшие, уже под занавес, так сказать. Ни во Вторую мировую войну.
The U.S. entered the war later than other countries, as public opinion largely opposed involvement in both Europe and the conflict with Japan until the attack on Pearl Harbor. Well, that's exactly the point, that democracy in peacetime is a very good tool, but in such conditions, when you are attacked by countries with dictatorship, it's very bad. Because you also brought up, yes, the United States of America, where they listened to the public whether they wanted to go to war or not. Here we have North Korea, yes, which just moves to the front and doesn't ask anybody anything. The issue is that the opposition between an authoritarian world and democracy is not comparable. After all, it is not a question of whether North Korea has achieved or not. Nobody cares, and the leaders of the DPRK don't care either. The main thing is to have control. Look, the North Koreans, the Kims, all three of them, of course, have and had levers of influence. But when we talk about international relations, here you said that democracy is less effective in times of war than an authoritarian regime. But I just said, if we talk about effectiveness, we talk about results. Has North Korea achieved anything supernatural? It's not like it defeated South Korea. It didn't conquer South Korea. So I'm simply against the claim that democracies are less effective. Here is Ukraine, democracy, Russia, autocracy. Did Russia win? No. Considering per capita proportions, it's clear that democracy has been more effective in Ukraine, given its smaller territory, population, and resources. I'm referring to the narrow direction of decision-making. Why is it necessary to coordinate and negotiate so much? Decision-making is easier, but authoritarianism leads to distortion of expertise, to institutional distortion.
Авторитаризм на длинных отрезках ведет к вырождению экспертизы, вырождению, там нет внутренней дискуссии, ведет к вырождению экспертизы, вырождению...
No one dares to oppose the dictator. As a result, decisions are made very easily. But the quality of these decisions is such that in the end, autocracies lose to democracies. Look, democracy in its modern form has been around for about 200 years, even if you count 100 years in some respects, for example, like universal suffrage. But during this time, if you don't look at short segments, because if you look at short segments, yes, there are setbacks, waves. But if you look at the long stretches, all these 200 years, the number of democracies and non-democratic regimes in the world changes. How many democratic regimes are there now? It's quite clear that the success of democracy is there. Democracy is going around the world, just not as fast and not as effectively as we would like. Nevertheless, it is quite obvious. Each wave of democratic transit, there have been 3 of them in 200 years, as we know. More precisely, Huntington, the author of this theory of democratic waves, called it 3. Other experts, some believe 4 or 5, but still, everyone mainly starts from Huntington. There were 3 waves of democratic transit, 3 waves of rollback. Each wave of rollback was much shorter in time than the wave of transit. The number of countries that rolled back towards authoritarianism has always been smaller than during the previous wave that went from authoritarianism to democracies. On average, the number of democracies is increasing. Therefore, democracy has proven to be effective, even though decision-making is of course difficult in democracies, and this is often a serious problem. Thank you for the conversation. I'd love to discuss more next time. I appreciate your insights on the important processes for October 16th. Thanks again, Abbas Gallyamov, political technologist. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. My name is Ihor Havryshchak.
Підпишіться, прокоментуйте і поділіться. Це дуже важливо. Мене звати Ihor Havryshchak. З вами побачимось в ефірі 24 каналу.